this conversation. It's a subject that I want to know more about it, but I want Dana really to explain to us, because I think there's so many people out there that don't know the details about EMDR therapy and how we can use that to heal different types of trauma in adults and also in adolescents and teenagers and kids. So I would love Dana to take us through. And she has done so many things. I mean, I could go through a lengthy bio here, but I think I want to get straight into it, because I know people's time is very precious. And I want Dana really to explain to us all about it. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Angelica. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about, the EMDR therapy and how we can use that to help us.
Absolutely. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's a trauma-informed treatment. It's evidence-based, it's been researched, and it's a trauma-informed treatment for PTSD. That being said, it's also indicated and very successful in other diagnoses, so to speak. And I put that in quotations on purpose, because the trauma-informed lens shows us that a diagnosis isn't the most important thing, but it's what happens in the body. But it's helpful for things like anxiety, depression, sports performance, all these different struggles that people can feel in their day-to-day life. And it's, like I said, trauma-informed in the sense that it looks at symptoms as maladaptively stored memories, meaning that experiences that you've gone through in your life that have not been properly encoded into your brain, that those experiences are stuck in their like brand new raw state, so that when you go through your present day life, you get triggered much more easily and start feeling all those same symptoms that you might have felt at the time or times that the experiences first took place.
That's really interesting. So if I understand right, so when you get, it could be a situation that creates the same feeling in your body and you don't even realize, right? And then before you know, you're almost like back into that, in body and mind, in that same state as where you were in your trauma kind of day.
Exactly. Because when people hear PTSD, they think more traditionally of what we see in the media and stuff, like visual flashbacks, like a soldier who all of a sudden is like seeing visual flashes of being back in combat and things like that. And that's one way that it can manifest, but it's not the most common. The most common is either behavioral reenactments, like we always say, trauma comes back as a reaction, not just a memory, right? So it can really manifest in those ways of feeling or thinking or acting, behaving in the way that we did when we went through those stressful life experiences.
Yeah, that resonates very much with my journey. But I didn't realize at the time that I was doing that. Like, what would you say to somebody who perhaps, they know that there is something that it's not quite right, or they are in some sort of crisis because, they've been diagnosed with something, or, they're experiencing something in their bodies, but they don't know yet where it stems from, and they have tried things, the conventional stuff like the talk therapy, and it hasn't really given them the results that they are looking for.
Right. So what I would say to those individuals is EMDR might work, right? Yeah. We want to assume that it's when we assess if it works, they don't have to know what those symptoms are connected to. That's part of the EMDR process. Yeah. So we know when it's applicable when we start going through the history taking process, and we do what's either called a float back or like a drift back to a bridge back to an earlier life experience. So how that would look is we say in a session where someone's like, oh, well, I'm really struggling with like being on the train, and every time I hear a baby cry, I want to run and I want to get the heck out of here as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Say, okay, so notice that feeling, that wanting to run, that emotional feeling you get. If there's a thought, is there a thought involved of, I have to get out, whatever. Notice that thought, notice that sensation in your body. And just float back to an earlier time in your life where you felt the same sensations. because memories are not stored in our brain like categories. Like we think of like a library catalog card where we just kind of go through.
Yeah.
Memories are stored by association.
Mm-hmm.
So we can follow the link and see what it's connected to. So when we encourage that float back in the history taking process, we won't immediately go into the details of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say to a client, for example, just notice what comes to mind. Don't give me the details. But if there's a memory that you do connect to, just tell me, like, if it were the name of a movie, what would it be called? Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we start making a list of potential targets for reprocessing that we call them.
Right. So like the five sensing, a movie, a music, like something that you felt in your hands, or a smell.
Right.
There is, some things like, our brain like can really connect to, like you say, the association, right? Like sometimes you smell something and it almost like brings you back to somewhere, right?
Absolutely. Our senses, our five senses are our doorway to the present moment, as well as a way to connect to the past.
Yeah.
So we can get very easily triggered by something like a smell or a sound or something, because the sensory component is very much in our limbic system,
Mm-hmm.
which individuals with PTSD, generalized anxiety, there's overactivation in the limbic system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we get so easily triggered by those sensory experiences. So we can use that connection to help us uncover what experiences they might be connected to.
Awesome. And I read a little bit on your website. I stalk you quite a bit. The website is
It's okay.
you're doing so much good work there.
Thank you.
And but I really love that you talked about how passionate you are about breaking degeneration cycle. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing? Perhaps giving like an example of a client, a success, example, so people can really understand how can that work.
Absolutely. So there's, if anyone has done research on epigenetics and things like that, we can see that if you look back 3 generations, that's a helpful indicator of the state of your nervous system if you have symptoms. So, and this is coming from one of the most amazing books called It Didn't Start With You.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's Mark Wollman, but don't quote me on that because I might be saying that incorrectly.
Yeah.
But so a woman is born with all of the eggs that she will have throughout her lifetime. So as you were growing in your mother, birth mother, whoever it is, or as your mother was growing in your grandmother, you were actually growing in your grandmother, because your mom was born with all the eggs that she would have, and you were one of those eggs. So you could actually, the things that happen to like your grandmother even can get encoded into your DNA in that way. And there's a lot of like epigenetic stuff and science behind it. Just in terms of just you and your direct mother, is that if your mother has gone through a lot of stress in her life, especially when pregnant with you, cortisol gets transmitted through the placenta and affects the development of the HPA axis in your brain, which is the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal gland cortex. And that's the part of our brain that regulates our hormones and our stress response system and all of that. So if your mother is going through a very stressful time, that can affect the development of your brain and how your nervous system may be hypersensitive to trauma, to experiences, to stress, or hypo, like not having a big enough stress response to be able to tolerate things.
Yeah. So there is some research that shows that within that you've got more of a tendency to have anxiety as a teenager, or
Right. Because it all affects the development of your own nervous system.
Yeah. So can you give us an example? Like, I saw that you're very passionate about working with parents. Like, so do you work with the parents and the kids as well, or just the parents, or how does that work?
Yeah. So my work with kids and stuff has evolved somewhat over the years. So I love working with children. However, I don't really do it as much anymore, because now I have children and I just can't do the hours. So usually there's a lot of after school stuff with working with kids. And because I want to be there for my own children, I can't really do it as much. But I do love to work with parents
Mhm.
and understanding how maybe their experiences are impacting how they may or may not be affected by their child's behavior.
Mhm.
So things like if a child gets angry or something and a parent's like, "Oh, be quiet, blah, blah, blah," that can really affect the child because the parent has a hard time tolerating anger or feeling safe with anger because of their own experiences, whether it's emotional neglect or anything. So working with parents to really get curious about their own experiences and how their child they might be triggered by their child and learn how to process those experiences so they can be the type of parent that they really want to be
Mhm.
and feeling much comfortable doing so.
Amazing, amazing. And in regards to, so do you see a lot of correlation between, especially like things like anxiety, depression, with parents that are suffering or perhaps have suffered in their kind of adult life, and then the kids also suffering the same?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's not a clear, like, if this happens, then that happens, but there's definitely a correlation between a parent's emotional, mental state and a child's. And
Mm-hmm.
that, can look something like postpartum, for example.
Mm,
If a mom is going through either postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, which is super common, not as talked about as PPD,
mm,
that can affect how a child's nervous system develops in those interactions.
mm-hmm.
So, what that looks like is something like if a mom is struggling with postpartum depression, her affect will be more flat, like she won't smile, things like that would be very flat affect. And how a baby operates, especially in the first 18 months of life, social reciprocity is a really important thing. So, that's like I make a silly face and mom laughs back. If
Yeah.
mom doesn't smile back, that causes a lot of distress in the child
Mm,
because that social reciprocity isn't happening. So,
mm-hmm.
for example, if you just go on YouTube and type in the still face experiment, you can actually get a visual example of exactly what I'm talking about. And it's actually kind of hard to watch.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
going to say, wow, that must be really
yeah,
hard. Yeah.
it's really, especially as a mom, it was super hard for me to watch. But that just shows how a parent's affect can affect their child as they're developing.
So, as a mom, like that, just even me, I'm sitting here thinking, like, going back, like there's so many things that we do unconsciously, right? Like, especially because they
Never
first,
intentional. A lot of it is all subconscious, unconscious, for sure.
yeah, yeah. So tell us a success story from a parent that you're working in, because I think, in the world these days, like with the social media, there is so much talks around, trauma and diagnosis and labeling and all of that. And I think it's important. But I think it's also important to talk about how we move on from it.
Right. Right.
Like how we can, and that's not to say that we want to achieve perfection.
Right, because it's not about being perfect. We also
Yeah,
wanna model for our children that it's
yeah,
okay to be imperfect and how to tolerate distress. Like, the goal is not a stress-free life.
yeah.
The goal is resiliency, to be able to tolerate stress.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, like if I look at my own journey, I didn't start the process of healing myself until my kids were 6 and 4. So,
Right.
in psychology terms, I had already damaged them, right, in a way, right? Because, all my patterns had already been passed on to them. But I have noticed that by healing myself, I have made an enormous impact on my
Right.
children's life. Uh,
Absolutely, 'cause their
and
brains
the
are still developing too.
Yeah, and their resilience, like I said, their resilience and how they deal with their own emotions.
Right.
And I know that it's a little bit hard to talk about specific like examples for due to privacy and things like that. But can you give us an example of uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I can share my own story
yes,
of when I first had my son. My son is 4.5 months old, 4.5 years old now. My daughter is 10 months going on 11. And when I was pregnant with him, great pregnancy, but definitely some things were getting kicked up to, and my therapist was like, think some of your family of origin stuff is getting activated. Why don't we do some more individual work, see what comes up? So we had done a lot of that. And then when I was getting to the end of my pregnancy, maybe about a week before, I started getting these awful, awful panic attacks.
Wow.
And through my own research and things like that, I'm like, wow, I didn't know that postpartum panic disorder was a thing.
Wow.
And some of it is just from the hormones in your body and things like that, and not necessarily based on experiences, but I am a very highly sensitive person. So those changes in hormones definitely triggered this visceral. It wasn't a mental kind of panic attack. It was very much, I was pacing the stairs in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. I was like throwing up, like very visceral panic.
Wow.
So when I gave birth, I was like a mess. And my husband, thank God, he's so supportive and wonderful. And I remember telling the doctors, like, I'm not okay, something's wrong. And I was, because of the work I'd done with my therapist and just my own work as a therapist, I was so aware of how if I didn't get the right kind of help, how
Yeah.
that could affect my son.
Mm.
And I said, I was like, I'm not leaving this hospital without medication,
Yeah.
without something to help, because if I don't, and postpartum is very real and it's chemical. Not everything has to be like, oh, it's a mental thing. And this is where I tell people all the time, medication has its place.
Mm.
Because that was completely from the hormones going on in my body. So my husband laughs at me because they give you this like terrifying checklist before they discharge you from the hospital. And one of the questions was, are you suicidal? Now, I wasn't suicidal, but I also knew that if I marked yes, they wouldn't let me go without a psych consult.
Yes.
Because if they did let me go without it, it would take me about 3 months to find a psychiatrist who was accepting new patients. In New York, it's like a nightmare. And I didn't want my son to be affected.
Yeah.
That was
3
where I
months
was.
is a long time. Yeah, 3 months is a long time, you know, like
Yes.
in a baby's life, right? That first 3 months is
Absolutely.
so important.
Yep. So I was like, oh, yep, I'm suicidal. I have thoughts of harming myself. I was like, I'll take my psych consult now. And this wonderful psychiatrist came and spoke with me, and I told him all about all my history and things like that. So he prescribed Lexapro, and I needed for a little while while I adjusted to having my son. And that helped me lean in and be able to care for him and not stuck in survival mode.
Mm.
And I say to parents all the time, if you're in survival mode, you can't help your child thrive, right? Because you're in fight or flight. And my body was in fight or flight. I was so tired. Like the thoughts were, I'm going to die. And then my son's not going to have a parent to like love me. Well, my husband's wonderful, but this is what was going on with me. So that really, really helped. And then doing my own deeper work too on the generational components, I started putting together where like the grief part and the fear of my son not having a parent really went back to my grandmother. When she was pregnant with her mom died.
Oh.
So that fear of losing a parent, of my son not having his mother, I was literally feeling that my grandmother's grief, because you can go 3 generations back. So like I even get chills when I think about it now.
Oh my God, yeah. So you
And that
carry
really,
the energy of that. Well, the energy of that was like going through each, you know, your mom, your grandma, and then you, and it was still stored in your body, and then it manifested
right.
into the panic attack.
And that inability to tolerate grief like that, I have felt since I was a small child. Like I remember like an uncle passing away when I was maybe 9, and I was not close with this uncle, but crying like you wouldn't believe, like terrible. So that everything started making sense of why I couldn't tolerate grief.
Yeah.
So I started putting all those things together and processing those experiences, even though they didn't happen to me. You can process it through the eyes of my grandmother. And that's how you can heal generations of trauma.
Yeah.
So I could see things through this lens of a more rational thought of, is there a probability that something might happen to me? Sure.
Yeah.
But the probability is quite low.
Yeah.
And if it does happen, my son's going to be okay.
Mm.
Because, and my daughter, because I have a wonderful husband who knows how to take care of them, and that I have imparted enough of myself on them. I hope to continue to impart more,
Mm.
but I know I have already set a good foundation
Yes.
for a developing nervous system.
And at that time, were you doing EMDR?
I was doing EMDR. I was doing with my therapist. We were doing attachment-focused work, like elements of EMDR, because there's the standard structured protocol
Yeah.
and more attachment-focused work.
Okay.
So it looks a little different when you do attachment-focused EMDR with it's different from the standard protocol.
So I read. We were talking about a little bit before when before we came on live. I read about EMDR for the first time in that book, "The Body Keeps the Score,"
Excellent book.
which is an excellent book. And I don't know if you remember, but he talks about that when he trained himself and he started, practicing that with his clients. One of his clients came in and said, "I don't want to say anything about this."
Right.
About what happened, like, I don't want to say anything. And he got really upset about it because he did not know for the first time, coming from a therapy background, he was like, why does he want to tell me?
Right.
And then one of his friends, who was also a psychotherapist or psychiatrist, said to him, like, what's with you? Like, he
said something like, if you want to hear a story, go to the bar, put a jar and says, tell me your story.
It's like, what's the matter with you? It's nothing to do with you. The person just wants to get healed, right? Like, they just help the person.
Right.
And so
that's more of our own issues as human beings to want to know the why. And EMDR, it's not about the why. Sure, there's we can make the connections, but we don't need to know the story and the ins and outs. I've worked with clients in the past where they don't want to tell me what it is, and that's okay. You don't have to tell me. Sometimes as the therapist, it's a little better if we don't know, because there's research that shows that doing EMDR helps prevent secondary PTSD to the therapist.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Which is very common. So I've had clients who don't tell me. I'm like, but can you see an image that represents it? Yep.
Yeah.
How much of a charge does it have? Like a 10, a 5. Notice where you feel it in your body and go with that. You don't have to tell me.
Yeah.
Okay. Now notice what comes up, and even if they don't have to give me a big report. Does it feel worse, better? Like if we give it a rating, okay, now notice what the worst part is and go with that. And it's interesting as we go through the desensitization, then they're able to be like, okay, now I could talk about it because it's processed so that in their brains, it's become a narrative instead of a reliving.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. So, how does it work? So basically, because I know that like you just said about the memories, it's not that it's even true, right? Sometimes, right? Because 50% of our memories are not true. It's just our perception of it, right?
Correct.
So how does it actually work for people to disassociate from that memory?
What do you mean? So
physically, so people can understand. I understand that you get the person to fix their mind on the image or on the feeling or whatever, and then you actually do something with your hands or whatever, and then to help.
Like that. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So talk us through a little bit about if somebody's a little bit skeptical and think but what would that do?
Yeah. So when we use the bilateral helps both hemispheres of the brain to communicate with one another. And they don't really know, the research yet hasn't said exactly how the bilateral works, but it's the dual attention stimulus of focusing on an image and the components of a memory, which are the image, the cognitions, the emotions, the sensations, while following either eye movements, or we use tappers, we call them. That dual attention on two things at the same time, taxes the working memory, which can decrease the charge that an experience or memory has.
Right.
So there's the working memory theory. That's one way that they say that it works. The other is that it gets the whole brain online and gets the emotional brain and the logical brain to talk to each other and to be able to create a narrative instead of fragmented pieces of an experience, and actually move that experience from being trapped in the limbic system to into the area of the brain where long-term memory is stored.
Right. Okay. So it's almost like, not that it gets the brain confused, because the brain gets so focused on that thing, right? And when
Too
you
focused. Yeah.
get too focused, right? It's like you get the brain to multitask, so the focus is that gets a bit dispersed.
Right.
Right.
And taxing that working memory can help take the charge out of a stressful life experience.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so if somebody, so you talk about, a lot about some of your work is done with people with anxiety, depression. So a lot of the people will be on medication.
So they can be on medication for sure.
Mhm.
There are some caveats to it. So something like a benzodiazepine, for example. So that's a Xanax, Ativan, Valium, things like that. We will usually say, do not use one the day of your session.
Yeah.
So not before and not after your session, because it can dull the effects of the
Yeah.
reprocessing. Because as much as people might not like to hear it, we need you to feel uncomfortable in order to process it.
Mhm.
So what a benzodiazepine does is it suppresses your nervous system response.
Yeah.
So if you're not feeling it, you can't process it.
Mhm.
So that can be tricky. We usually will say that's contraindicated. Doesn't mean you can't use them ever, but not the day of processing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other medications like an SSRI or things like that are okay.
Mhm.
What often happens is that as somebody processes something, then they might say, okay, I don't know if I need my medication anymore. So they might come down off of it slowly. And then there might be like pieces left to reprocess,
Mhm.
because that's another thing that suppresses your nervous system response. It can dull it a little bit. So once you come off of the medication, which medications like that, SSRIs and so forth, have to be tapered off more slowly, then there might be just like, a percentage left to process, like a little bit of a charge to process out afterwards, like a tune-up.
Yeah. So if people also asking themselves, so how many sessions would I need? And I can imagine like that's just a question that it's so, I can imagine it's so hard to answer, right? Like, but how do you go about assessing that?
Yeah. So my response is, well, what are your goals?
Mhm.
So how long it will take is immediately connected to what your goals are.
Mhm.
So let's say I ask a client, like, are we just focusing on present day issues? You don't want to go to earlier stuff. That's going to be more symptom reduction. So
Okay.
we're only focusing on the present, and the future, that's going to be a lot shorter. So in a single incident, let's say it's a car accident or something like that, so one event, 6 to 8 sessions of 90 minutes and you're done.
Yeah.
Versus comprehensive treatment, where, I have a lot of anxiety, I struggle with it my whole life, and I go to the earliest stuff, like the earliest childhood traumas. That could take longer
Mhm.
because you can't heal from a lifetime of stress overnight.
No.
But that being said, it won't be nearly as long as talk therapies and
I
things like
was
that.
just about to say that.
The example I use is, I had a wonderful client who's doing beautifully well now. And she was very committed to her treatment and did the work out of the session, like
Mhm.
practicing her skills that we review in phase 2 resourcing, and practicing that outside to help her nervous system tolerate the reprocessing where we work together. And in less than a year, she was done.
Wow,
And
that's,
this was with a lot of childhood stuff, but less than a year, that's pretty good.
oh my God, that's amazing.
Typical for every, the results you get are dependent on how much effort you put in inside and outside of the session.
Yeah, that's so powerfully said. I mean, I have worked with a lot of clients, especially in America, that have been going to therapy for like 10 years.
Right.
Like, well, I mean, it's and we have been conditioned to believe that, that's okay. Like
And it has its place. Some people
yeah,
just like
exactly.
having an unbiased third party to talk to.
Yeah.
And that's, I always say to my clients, what's our intention for our session today? Are we
Yeah.
doing like trauma work, or do you need me to hold space for what's gone on in your life this week?
Yeah.
It's their session, but let's just be intentional so we're still making progress towards our treatment goals.
Yes. Yeah.
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 And I think that is very important because, like you said, if you think that you have had anxiety or depression for your whole life, and in
Right.
1 year, you can, and I'm not just saying that that's going to happen to everybody, but in 1 year, you can actually resolve that by committing yourself with the work in
Right.
session and out of session. Like you said, I think
Right.
that's incredible because,
Absolutely.
you could be staying on medication for the rest of your life, for example, right? And not having or not experiencing a real result in your day-to-day life. So I think I think it's so important to always highlight that when a healing process is never a one-side thing.
Right.
It's a two-way thing, right? It's how much
Absolutely.
effort does the client wants to put in.
Right. I have anything worth having was not achieved without effort.
Yeah, for
And that's the
sure.
same goes for your healing, right? So if you don't put in the effort, and sometimes that effort is just showing up
Mm,
and being committed to the process. If you don't put that effort in, you're not going to get the results that you want.
yeah,
It's just like working out, right? So like you could think about working out, you can put on your sneakers, you can go to the gym, but you can just like walk around the gym, look
yeah.
at the machines, but then you're not going to get the results. Or you can get on the machines and use them and get the
Mm,
results that you want, whether it's, getting more fit, mental clarity, all of that.
yeah. I
Therapy
love
needs
that
to be
you say that because also I believe that there is this idea that you're going to go somewhere for somebody else to solve your problem, right? So
right.
I'm just going to go and, take the vitamins. I'm going to go to see this health practitioner and I'm going to come out.
You're going to do it for me.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's what we always say about EMDR therapy is the difference between EMDR and talk therapy is that with methods like CBT, for example, the therapist is the agent of change, right? They're like, teaching reframing and things like that. EMDR therapy, the client's nervous system is the agent of change.
Amazing.
I tell them, when people are like, oh my God, you helped me so much. Thank you. I'm like, you did it.
Mm,
I was like the conductor on the train, keeping you on the track,
hmm.
but you did the work.
Yeah.
So it's much more client-centered,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they can feel that, pride in themselves. Like, wow, I did something that was really uncomfortable, and now the reward is amazing.
Yeah, because it's practical, isn't it? You're engaging their body and mind together in this session, right? Like it's not just like, words.
Right. It's not a cognitive therapy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The deeper I have gotten into the EMDR therapy world is because, sometimes in basic training, it can come off as more of a cognitive model.
Uh-huh.
That being said, that was, my training was 10 plus years ago. Now there's, more training materials and stuff. And the more that I've gone into the world, the more you realize that the cognitive is just not important. It's
Mhm.
relative in the sense that it's the cognition, our thoughts are a manifestation of the state of our nervous system.
Mhm.
But just like how we say with CBT, your thoughts can affect how you feel.
Mm.
With body work, with somatic stuff, with EMDR therapy, how you feel affects how you think.
Yeah, for sure.
Story follows state. So when
Yeah.
we can heal what's trapped inside of us, our thoughts automatically get better.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And there is again so much research now that talks about that, right? That the body does keep this score, and there is things that are lodged the energy of it in our bodies. And I lived through that myself as well. And I think that I don't think you can truly feel this healing unless you make that connection.
Right. Right.
Especially as
And
an
your
adult
whole
after.
body.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. Right. Your whole body was in on the process when the stress took place. So you need your whole body
yeah,
to work through the healing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I would say you can't think your way out of trauma.
No.
Right. But
Yes, exactly. You can't. Exactly. Yeah.
right. Right.
I would love you to touch on your nonprofit work as well. I thought that was so beautiful. Like, it's an opportunity for you to just tell us a little bit more about it
Absolutely.
as
Yeah.
well.
So we started, my husband and I, a while back, we started a nonprofit called Let's Bully Cancer. And that's to help low income families afford life saving medical treatment for their pit bulls. And
Wow.
that was really started from our dog at the time. He was diagnosed with a glioma, a brain tumor, when he was about 9 or 10 years old.
Hmm.
And I remember sitting in the vet's office and finding it because he started having seizures. He was always like a little bit of an anxious dog, but his seizures, his anxiety started getting worse and worse and worse, like breaking out of the house, chewing things, all that. So our vet, God bless her, was like, I just read this research article that talked about like gliomas in dogs, and they happen to have the neurologist right here where we live that can do the scans for it. Awesome. Great. We go do the scan. They find the tumor.
Mm.
So they were like, okay, well, we do the treatment here. It's CyberKnife treatment, which they use for adults as well with cancer.
Mhm.
And I remember sitting there in the vet's office almost with this feeling of guilt of, I am so freaking fortunate that I could just be like, yeah, do the treatment,
Yeah.
not giving a crap what it costs. Like, because my husband and I are successful, and we're smart with our money, things like that. And we didn't have kids at the time. So that was a big part of it. And I just remember feeling so grateful
Hmm.
that I was able to have that treatment for my dog. And after that treatment, and I also did Reiki on him, and I changed his diet. I did removed all grains from his diet. I cooked for him for like the next bunch of years. My husband would be like, "What's for dinner?" I'm like, "I don't know, takeout, but the dog has fresh food." Great. And with the treatment, they usually said the life expectancy is 12 to 18 months, and he lived for another 4 years.
Wow.
And he actually, I'll cry because that was my first baby, but I was pregnant with my son when he passed.
Oh,
And I
that's
really believe that he passed because my next baby was coming into the world, and that's why he felt okay to leave.
wow.
Um, but we got another 4 years out of him.
That's amazing.
And so I just remember feeling so grateful and wanted to be able to give that feeling to somebody else of,
Mm.
you don't have to put down your baby because you can't afford the treatment.
Hmm.
So we are able to, fundraise and create a pool to help somebody decrease the cost of their treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and that's what we do.
Oh, that's amazing. That
My
is
little
amazing. Now,
yeah.
I do have 2 kids and a dog now, and I must admit, like, the kids go, "Mama, you love the dog more than us." And I was like,
Like, yes,
"No."
we do, because they don't talk back. Yeah.
Well, he is much easier and more grateful, so
Yeah. Yeah. That's so we have our dog now is Jack, who's the love of my life, and I'm obsessed with him. But the running joke is, of course, the PTSD therapist gets the dog with PTSD. So he has terrible anxiety, the sweetest boy, super passive. He's not aggressive,
yeah.
anxious, he's passive. But I'm like, so we just crack up. I'm like, of course. So like when he gets upset, I start tapping him and doing all like the fun EMDR things. I'm like, let's see if this works. Body work. Yeah.
And the kids are like, "Mom, I'm here. Sorry." I'm still
Well, my son knows too. God, my son is so empathic, and he's like, "Mom, look, he's feeling better." Or, "Oh, look, Jack's scared because his ears are pinned back or his tail is down."
Oh,
And he's able to read those body cues
so
because I
beautiful.
teach him, like, the
Yeah.
body will tell us how they're feeling.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. Dogs
Yeah.
can teach us a lot of things. Yes,
Yes,
a lot of
absolutely.
things. I love
They're a beautiful picture
how
of
they
that because
shake,
they don't get
like,
cognitive.
how they shake their bodies, like, I
It's how they
really
discharge stress.
yes,
Yep.
yes, and I thought, if we human beings went around just like after we had an interaction that wasn't that great and we shook ourselves, which
Yeah.
there is some research around that. I think it's 𝗓𝗪 that talks about that. We we would actually not be carrying like people's negative charge that or
Yeah.
things that are not ours, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's why, like, some people who, if they, like, go for a run or do something where they can just literally shake it off, that's helping discharge
Yeah.
that pent-up energy that
Mm.
was felt from that negative interaction.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
it's
for sure.
really, really helpful. Otherwise, that energy stays trapped, and it's gotta go somewhere, right? So if it stays trapped, after a while, too much of it can cause us to start shutting down.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So tell us how we can reach out, how can people reach out to you and, book sessions, and how does the process work?
Absolutely. So I have a whole practice that I've built in Scarsdale, New York called Peaceful Living Mental Health Counseling. And if anybody wants to work with a great EMDR therapist, not just myself, but my team that is all here, they can go to peacefullivingmentalhealthcounseling.com and find out more. And then to find out more about my work as an EMDR therapist and the books that I've written and things like that, they can go to the EMDRcoach.com,
Mm-hmm.
and as
All
well
right.
as Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, just the EMDR coach. And they can find me, and they can send me a DM, they can send me a message through the website and all that good
Amazing.
stuff. Yeah.
So, and in regards to doing online sessions, because some of the people that follow me might not be in America, like how does that work?
Yeah. So here in the States, a therapist can only practice in the
Oh,
states that they're licensed in, or every state has its own rules. Sometimes it's the state that the client lives in. We can work with individuals who are in New York, New Jersey, Florida, or Connecticut.
okay.
Outside of the United States, it's weird because there's no federal law that
Mm-hmm.
says this is what you can or cannot do. So I would always suggest a client like reaching out to either their governing body and seeing, because it's impossible for us to know the laws for every
Yeah,
country in
yeah,
the
yeah.
world, and just check in with what are your laws regarding, virtual sessions and this and that. Or they could go to 𝗪𝗓𝗪𝗓.org and just find a clinician that's in their area that
Mm.
they might be able to see in person or still virtually. But that could be a great way, because EMDR can be done virtually.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you get the same results done virtually or in person?
You can. What I will say is that it really is client dependent.
Uh-huh, yeah.
So
Mm.
some people really, especially those with attachment trauma, being in person really helps them feel safer because they might have grown up never feeling cared for or never having a safe person in their life. So in person really helps them feel more grounded and safe.
Mhm.
But that's not everybody. I've had some clients who have had attachment trauma, and we've done
Yeah.
strictly virtual, and they've made phenomenal progress.
Mhm.
So it's really dependent on the client
Yeah.
and what makes them feel the best, and like without it being an avoidant thing. And I mean that in the sense that some people are avoidant to being in person because of the anxiety, and we don't want to collude with that either.
Yes.
Yes. So it's really person specific, and all of that can be fleshed out in a free consult that most therapists do.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Then I'll add all the links below. It's been incredible. You've been so generous with your time and with your
Thank
knowledge sharing
you.
with us. I think that's such an important message that needs to be more spoken about, because I think it's definitely an incredible therapy that can help so many people.
Agreed. Yeah. Can't say I disagree.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you
Well,
for
thank you so
having me.
much. Thank
Thank you.
you.